No matter what kind of creature you're housing, there are so many options for enclosures. Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome back to my channel. So this week we are going to be talking all about the different kinds of enclosures. I get a lot of questions about what kind of enclosures are best for insert animal name here. So I thought I would just kind of make a pros and cons for different kinds of enclosures. Just know that all of these enclosures can be fantastic, and it really just depends on you and what you are looking for specifically. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by iHeartGecko, so make sure to stay until a little bit later, not quite the end of the video, to find out all about this awesome company. Let's get started. So the first kind of enclosure that we're going to talk about is glass enclosures, and this is the most common enclosure for reptiles, amphibians, all of the things. This is what most people have, and that's because they're available everywhere on like all yard sale sites, Craigslist. Every pet store that you go to is going to have some forms of glass tanks, and those can be super inexpensive, especially if you do things like Petco's dollar per gallon sale that they have multiple times throughout the year. They can be used to hold in humidity by using something like an acrylic lid. They can be used to air out the tank by using something like a mesh lid. They are already waterproof, so if you're wanting to do something like a bioactive tank or a poldarium, you don't have to do anything special to it. They're already sealed. There are also brands like Exoterra, National Geographic, Zoo Med that make tanks that open up in the front. So if you're looking for some sort of situation where you don't have to reach down to grab your reptile, you have a front opening tank option as well. In addition, you can buy glass tanks and buy conversion kits to turn them up to make vertical tanks for arboreal animals. As you guys know, my sponsor, iHeartGeckos, makes those conversion kits. They are super easy to install. You just use aquarium safe silicone, which they actually usually have on their website as well, or you can get it from Walmart, Home Depot, wherever, and you just put that conversion kit in the tank and it turns it into a vertical tank for your animal. So you just took a super cheap glass tank, maybe even a glass tank that you had laying around, and a very inexpensive conversion kit, and made a beautiful tank for your arboreal animal. If you happen to order one of these, make sure to leave Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear About Us box when you place that order. Thank you again so much to iHeartGeckos for sponsoring this video. Moving on to the cons of glass tanks, they can get very heavy very fast, especially if this is something that you plan on moving at any point. If you're looking at 75, 150 gallon glass tanks, that's usually not going to be something that you're going to be able to safely move by yourself. They also get pretty expensive when they get that big as well. Even the Petco dollar per gallon sale only goes up to, I think, a 29 gallon tank, and then everything is just kind of half off as opposed to $1 per gallon. Speaking of moving around heavy glass tanks, it's glass, so it is also easily breakable. We have had glass tanks shatter during moves, so definitely keep that in mind as well. There's also not a lot that you can really do to customize glass tanks. I know some people will strip silicone and replace panels and things like that, but for the most part, you're getting what you get. And because it's all glass, your animals might not feel as safe as they could unless you black out those sides. And some reptiles, like Chinese water dragons, can't really be in glass tanks at all because they tend to glass surf until they rub blisters into their noses. But for the most part, glass tanks are super cheap, they're easy to find, and they're going to be a good, safe, easy option. Next up is Sterilite Bins. Sterilite Bins are another super popular one because they are super cheap. I did a quick Google search and saw that you could get a 50-gallon one for about $25. Another awesome thing about Sterilite Bins is that they are very light. You can pick it up and move it around as you please if it's empty, and they're super customizable because they're plastic. So if you need extra ventilation, you can cut some ventilation holes in the top. You can drill into the sides. You can take little drill bits and just make a bunch of little tiny holes. holes. Also, if you get the solid color ones or even the foggy Sterilite bins, those usually make your animals feel more secure. My crocodile skink Cersei had sprung a leak in her tank that we built for her, and we had temporarily put her in a Sterilite bin, but she loves her Sterilite bin. She comes out all of the time now. She was never out before. She hid 24/7, and now that she's in a Sterilite bin that has those foggy sides where she can't see us, she actually feels comfortable to get out and move and eat in the middle of the day, which is awesome. Again, they're available everywhere, Walmart, Target, any kind of office supply store, they're gonna have them. And just like I needed for the crocodile skink, they're gonna hold in that humidity, and if you want a little bit of humidity let out, like I said, you can add vents and customize it. I am definitely a fan of Sterilite bins. On to the cons of them. They don't look great. They are making my crocodile skink super happy and comfortable, so that's where she's staying, but it doesn't look as good as a fully bioactive, completely done tank. Again, another con, you can't really see into them as well. There are just completely clear ones that you can see into a little bit better, but it's not gonna be as good as looking through glass or acrylic. And getting appropriate lighting for certain species, so if your animal requires a high temperature basking spot or a lot of UV lighting, getting that into a Sterilite bin is going to be a little bit more difficult because plastic melts, and getting fixtures that's going to sit on top of that and shine through into the bin is going to be difficult without modification. But if you don't mind that, then they are an awesome choice. Next up is rack systems. Rack systems are basically the go-to for breeders, and it's because there's quite a few pros to them. They are going to hold a lot of animals in a very small space, which saves a lot of space. They also are pretty inexpensive relative to how many animals you are keeping in them. So if you have a rack system that contains 6 ball pythons, yes, that rack system might have seemed a little expensive, but if you think about how expensive it would have been to get 6 setups with tanks and heating and everything else that they need, it is actually pretty inexpensive in comparison. And in a rack system, there is one central thermostat that is usually hooked up to something like heat tape. So basically the heating system is all one system, which makes life a lot easier if you know that everything is being heated equally. But it can also be a con, because that means if that heating goes out or if that thermostat goes out, it goes out for all of those animals. If it malfunctions and your heat tape or whatever starts to overheat, it's overheating for all of those animals, which could be a scary situation quickly if that were to happen. They are harder to find. It's not going to be like Sterilite bins and glass tanks where you can just run to the nearest pet store and grab it, or run to Walmart and grab it. These are usually going to be sold online by people who specially make rack systems or at reptile shows, and very occasionally I will see them on Craigslist. Just like the Sterilite bin, you also usually can't see your animals very well. There are specific kinds that have viewing windows across the front, but otherwise you're not going to be able to really see those animals. A couple other cons, in my opinion: a lot of times when people get rack systems for their animals, they don't give them as much enrichment as the animal actually needs. They don't give them as much space as the animal actually needs, because they see that breeders keep them in these minimalistic setups. Most of the time breeders are keeping those baby animals for a very short amount of time. It's meant to be a temporary thing, and it shouldn't be how your animal spends their entire life. My favorite example of rack systems that I have mentioned several times is Snake Discovery. I love the way she does her rack systems. They have the appropriate substrate. If it is a burrowing animal, there is burrowing substrate in that tank. She puts fake leaves and hides and water dishes and everything that that animal needs in those rack systems. Please give your animal everything they need if you're going to keep them in a rack system. And the last con is that this just isn't going to be a viable option if your animal needs specific UV lighting or specific basking spots, especially if they're high basking spots, because rack systems are made to be compact. Rack systems are not going to be suitable for every reptile. PVC or vision cages. I really like this style of tank, and that's because there are several pros to them. One of the biggest biggest ones is that they are super light, which becomes super important when you start looking at things like Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons. Those guys need a lot of space, and having them in a PVC tank is going to be a lot easier to potentially move those tanks down the road if necessary. They also do an amazing job at holding in humidity, and they usually have darkened sides, so they make your animal feel a lot more secure. The amount of customization that you can do to PVC tanks is also a lot. Usually the manufacturers will offer things like different sizes, of course, different colors. They will offer pre-installed lighting like UV lighting, basking lighting, LED lighting. They usually come with the option for heat pads, heat tape, different kinds of ventilation, more ventilation, less ventilation, glass doors, acrylic doors, whatever you need. Usually you can find someone that can put that into a PVC tank. Not that I would necessarily suggest drilling into your new PVC tank, but if you needed to, it's PVC, and if you just needed to add something like more ventilation or room for more lights or whatever down the road, usually that is super easy to add and modify as well, which is another big pro. They do get a little bit pricey though. Usually all of those add-ons are adding more and more to that price tag, and this is another one that you're not going to be able to just go into the pet store and find. You're going to have to order it specifically from manufacturers or pick one up at a reptile show, so not very easy to find and a little bit pricey. Wooden terrariums. Pros of wooden enclosures. Number one, you can build your own wooden enclosure. This can be a pretty cheap option, especially if we're getting into huge reptile terrarium builds for things like monitors or tegus, things that need a lot of room. And since they're made of wood, they can look like furniture. Again, if we're looking at something that is going to be a huge enclosure and you want it to be in your living room as a centerpiece for your living room, you can make that wooden enclosure look like anything you want it to look like. And lots of customization. Again, if it's wood, you can add ventilation, you can add lights, you can customize this in any way that you want to if that is something that is needed. You're able to customize the color of it, the look of it, all of that stuff. But the biggest pro of wooden enclosures to me is that you can build them yourself, and it becomes a very cheap, viable option for larger reptiles. But I don't know of anywhere here in the southern United States where I'm from where I could just go and buy a wooden enclosure. So I'm going to say, for me personally, a big con is that you can't just go and buy them and pick them up from somewhere usually. And the other big con is that this isn't going to be the best for humidity loving reptiles unless it is properly sealed. Now, to seal it, you can use something like a pond sealer, but that is just another step that's going to have to be taken if you are looking for something that loves humidity and needs a lot of space. On to acrylic tanks. Acrylic tanks are super light because they are made of acrylic, and they're not terribly hard to find. Again, you're not going to be able to walk into a pet store and just buy one, but a lot of reptile shows are going to have them. You are going to find a lot of places online to order them. For my pink-toe tarantula, his acrylic tank came from Amazon, and it's going to be pretty inexpensive if you're looking at smaller animals. Or you could even make this yourself. Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that sell sheets of acrylic, and you can have them cut those sheets down into specific sizes, or you can cut them down at home into specific sizes and make your own. And they can be made to hold in humidity by having less ventilation, or to make it a little more arid by adding your own vents. It is pretty customizable and very easy to work with. And cons, like I said before, they get pretty expensive pretty fast, so if you are looking at getting an enclosure for a large reptile, this might not be a viable option unless you're wanting to shell out a lot of money. And they are usually going to be clear, meaning that your animal might not feel as secure in this kind of tank without some modifications, as opposed to an enclosure that isn't clear all around. And the last category is DIY enclosures. Now, I know we already talked about a couple of DIY things like wooden enclosures, building those yourself or building acrylic enclosures yourself, DIY enclosures are pretty important, I think, to add to the list, because with these, the possibilities are endless. You can turn almost anything into a reptile enclosure, and I think that is awesome. As you guys know, Zaz's tank was an old jewelry cabinet, show cabinet, whatever that thing is called, that we picked up at a Habitat for Humanity restore, and we were able to turn that into an effective bearded dragon tank. And that tank was $30 or $40 when we bought it from Habitat for Humanity restore, and it comes out to be about 100 gallons, which is a pretty good deal for that big of a tank. I've also seen people turn bookshelves and entertainment centers, china cabinets, coffee tables, all of this old furniture into very effective reptile tanks that look really good, and you get exactly what you want in terms of size and how it looks and what goes into it and lighting and doors and all of that. If you like to do DIY projects and things like that, doing a DIY tank build is very fun. It is you putting all of your creative energy into something that you are repurposing for your animal or building from the ground up for your animal. But cons, if you don't enjoy doing that, the biggest con is you have to do it yourself, and some people just don't like doing that, and that is perfectly okay. Especially if you don't have the tools or don't know how to use the tools. If you are having to buy tools to do this, it's going to get very expensive very fast, and depending what all you are putting into this tank build, it's going to get very expensive very fast if you go all out. And the other big con here is that you have to be careful in terms of chemicals and paints, and just making sure everything you use is safe for your animal, and making sure that everything you use is drying out appropriately and there's no fumes and all of that, as opposed to something like a glass tank. When you get it and it's good to go, building your own tank is going to take more time and effort to make sure that it is safe for that animal. So definitely 1000% make sure that you know what it is you are using in that DIY enclosure. But that is it for this video. I just wanted to do a quick video just kind of comparing all the different kinds of enclosures. Not all the different kinds, there's more kinds. Just comparing some of the different kinds of enclosures that are pretty common for animals, since I get a lot of questions about it. As always, if you are not already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday. This week's Instagram shout out goes to Natalie's Reptiles for following me on Instagram, going through and liking a whole bunch of stuff. Thank you so much, Natalie. You are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Actually, another pro. And it's been 8 minutes talking about glass tanks. Jeez. Okay, hurry up. Instagram shoutouts. Instagram shoutouts. Instagram shoutouts. Instagram shoutouts.